Okay, so next we're going to get some work doing some of the white details that are on the model. And outside of the banner, that's really just going to be in two places. One on this pauldron. I believe this is the one that's on his left arm. And then on the bottom part of this little section there, you can see some flames. And those are going to be white. Now, but before we start putting any whites of any kind on there, because we're going over a black undercoat, it would take us an awful lot of coats to get a solid white going here. And that increases our chance that we're going to get unwanted texture on that part of the model. So I'm going to do kind of an in-between step here instead. I'm going to take some of that Carcharodon gray or Administratum gray, if you were using Citadel, that we were using earlier, and I'm going to apply this as a base coat all over the area we want to be white before we go over with the actual white. This is going to help us not need so many coats of white in order to do that. And we're going to base coat kind of the same way we do with everything. We thin the paint down. I didn't go too much because, again, I don't want to do a ton of coats, but I still want it to be nice and smooth. And again, I'm just going to pick a spot and I'm going to start working this on there. I'm going to keep my brush moving, trying my best not to go back over areas that we've already painted. Don't worry if you get some on this symbol here. That's pretty much impossible to avoid. And again, we're going to go back over and we'll paint all that and clean it up later. I'm just going to try my best to be careful around the silver armor so that I don't have to go back and do any cleanup on that. But yeah, it's probably going to take more than one coat for this, but I'm just going to work my way around all these areas that we wanted to be white and get them covered in this light gray paint so that we have an easier time getting our white to go over the top of it. So I'm going to finish up getting this solid gray color going here. And once I've got that, we will come back, have a look at it, and then we'll get started getting the white put on there. Okay, so here we have the result of getting that gray on there. And you see it's not perfectly opaque, but that's all right because it was really just meant to be a middle ground step in between what we were working on. So now we're going to go on to getting the actual white on there. And we're not going to use a true white because I still want to be able to highlight up a little bit on this. So instead we're going to use an off-white. That's going to be Trooper White from Two Thin Coats. From Citadel, that would be like Corax White would be the equivalent there. We're going to apply it just the same way we would with any base coat, right? And even with the gray on there, it's still likely going to take us a couple of thin coats to really get a nice and opaque white going on here. Because most white paints don't tend to cover super well, especially over darker colors like black. But we're going to do the same kind of thing. We're just going to pick a spot. We're going to start applying it, keeping the brush moving, trying our best not to go back over areas again that we've already gone over. If we have to go back and do areas, we can wait till it dries completely, and we can go back and go over it. But I want to try to avoid tearing or creating any texture in the paint as it's drying. And again, don't worry about the symbol. We'll get that all cleaned up at a later date. see, even with that gray under there, it's still going to take us a little bit of work to get this to be a fully opaque white. So just be patient with it. Make sure you let all your layers dry completely before you move on to another one. Yeah, keep going with a few thin coats and eventually get that nice opaque white, and then we can move on to the next step. Okay, here we have our white armor. So just a note on, kind of like how much patience you might need to get that coverage. Even with all of that gray that we did as the previous coat, it still took me 6 thin coats to get a white coverage that I was happy with here. So take your time, be patient, don't rush it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to work on getting some shading put into this. And I'm going to start this out by doing a little bit of kind of glaze shading. I'm going to do this down towards the lower areas of the pauldron. So what I did is I took some of that carcharodon gray, or that administratum gray that we were using, and I thinned it down really heavily so it was basically a glaze. It's almost translucent. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just start glazing that down towards the bottom portion of the armor there. Start about halfway up, and I'm going to pull it down. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to let that dry, and it's barely going to be visible at first. All right, and because it's so thin, it's going to dry pretty quickly. It's going to be almost immediate. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to start just a little bit lower than where I had previously started. And I'm going to do the same thing again, just pulling it down towards the base. And I'm going to keep repeating that step over and over again until I'm happy with the gradient that I've managed to work up here. So again, this is another thing you're going to have to be patient with. It's going to might take quite a few coats to get this kind of all sorted out the way that you want it. Make sure that you're removing all the paint from your brush and don't drop your paintbrush like I just did. And again, this step is also completely optional. If you wanted to skip this and move along to the next highlighting stage, or not highlight, the next shading stage, that's totally fine. You absolutely could do that. But if you want to do this just as a way to kind of take your painting of this model up to the next level, this is a really good technique to give your model just a little bit more depth, a little bit more interest when people are looking at it. So I'm going to keep going with that for a while, and then I'll kind of come back and show you what we got, and we'll move on to the next stage of highlighting. Okay, and here we have the result of getting that soft shading on there. And to be honest, it's so subtle that I'm not even sure my camera can quite pick that up. But that's the point. It's supposed to be kind of subtle, just to give it a little extra depth. And I did end up taking a little bit of the base coat, that Trooper White, getting it real thin down like a glaze itself, and then glazing back upward towards the top to smooth out the transition just a little bit. But we're going to move on to the next stage of shading here, and we're going to do a recess shade with this. And for that, I'm going to use some Eidolon Gray. Citadel, this would be Skavenblight Dinge, would be the equivalent. And what I'm going to do is, again, I've thinned it down pretty heavily, not quite to the glaze, but almost to like that wash consistency. I'm going to get some, I'm going to remove most of the excess from my brush. And then here I'm going to take this and I'm going to run it into all of the deepest recesses of this portion of the armor. And if you make any mistakes like I just did there, that's okay, because we can come back in with some of the white and we will clean that up afterwards. Just take your time as you're doing this to try to make as few mistakes as possible, because it is, since we're using white, it is kind of hard it's going to take a little bit more effort to get everything all cleaned up than it would if we were using a different color. Okay, so we're back. I got all that edge highlighting in there in the recesses, or edge shading, essentially recess shading in there. I did also go back in and clean up that symbol with some of the black. Again, totally optional. You do not have to do that. It just helps me to focus. I did the same thing on those little flames there on the front. So now we're going to move into highlighting. And before we get to the edge highlighting, I'm going to do a little bit of glaze highlighting just up a little bit towards the top of the pauldron where I feel like light would be catching the most. On the model itself, the pauldron is on at a little bit of an angle. So this upper area here, I feel like would be catching the most light. So I'm going to do a little bit of glazing upward towards that area. And I'm going to do that using some AK white, because I think they make really nice whites. But realistically, whatever pure white you want to use would work just fine. So I've thinned it down heavily with a bunch of water. And I'm going to grab some of my brush, remove almost all of it so that there's very little left. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start partway up the pauldron. See there? And I'm just going to glaze this upwards, bringing my brush in towards the area where I want it to be the brightest. Same thing as when we were doing the darker, glazing downwards, then let it dry completely before you go back in with another coat. And you're probably going to need a few. But again, always bringing the brush up towards the area where you want it to be the brightest. Because wherever you take your brush off, that's where the most paint is going to be left. And that's where we're going to get the brightest highlight. So I'm going to do a few coats of that. Don't think we'll need too many. And then afterwards, we will begin to do an edge highlight using AK white as well. Okay, after about 4 coats, I got that nice subtle highlight going on there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take some of that AK white, fit it down, normally, how we would to do just an edge highlight with it. So I want it, smooth, but not running out of control. I'm going to switch to a slightly smaller brush. Back to that Rosemary & Co. Size 0. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start our edge highlight. First, we're going to go just around the rim of the pauldron. So I'm going to go up above where I had my recess shade. And we're just going to run a line as neatly as we can. Around the whole area. So just turn it as model as I need to get a comfortable grip. And then start working up here as well. It's going to be fairly subtle. It's not going to be the most outrageously bright highlight you've ever seen, because the off-white we used previously is very close to a pure white. But it'll give it just that little bit of extra definition. So I'll finish that pauldron in a second, but what I wanted to show is I'm also going to do that on the front with those flame designs that we had going on there. And I'm going to switch to an even smaller brush for this because that's a pretty small area to work with. So I'm going to go to that size 00 from Artist Opus. And what I'm going to do here, again, turning the model however I need to get a comfortable spot, is I'm just going to go in along these flames that we got going on here. Give a little edge highlight of that pure white. Take your time. It's a fairly small detail, so it's not going to be the easiest thing in the whole wide world to highlight. But if you take your time, go nice and slow, you should be able to get a pretty neat and tidy highlight on there. So I'm going to work on getting that all finished up, and then we'll come back and we'll have a look at the result. Okay, and with that, our white sections of our armor are complete. So next we'll move on to doing the bits of various red detail that are around the armor. Okay, and now we are going to come and we're going to finish one of the last details here for this video, and that's going to be some of these different red areas on the armor. And these are going to be pretty small, but it's going to include areas like the covers of these little books that are all over his armor. And then on the pauldron here, it's going to be the interior of this Inquisition marking, and then the background of the sword here. We are going to leave the cloak and the banner, those red areas, alone from now because we're going to do those all at once in a separate video. So to start with a base coat here, I'm going to use Citadel's Mephiston Red. It's kind of a nice, bright but not overly bright, kind of like middle tone red. And I'm going to thin that down with some water. And I'm going to use a pretty small brush to do all of this base coating because these details are very small. So I got that Artist Opus size 00 here. And to base coat this in, for instance, on inside the Inquisition mark here, we're just going to come in and run that color in inside of there. We're going to need a few coats to get this nice and solid on there. And that's all right. Just take your time with it and get that all base coated in as neatly as we can. When working on those book covers on the armor here, what we're looking for is just the little section that's in between the two gold kind of bookends that are going on there. So we're just going to go in and run a line in along there, like that. We're going to do that on all of the various books floating around on the armor. So just be careful with that. Take your time. Try to be as neat as possible. You have to go over it a couple of times with a few thin lines to build up the color. That is perfectly okay. That's kind of what we're looking for there. So I'm going to finish working my way around, finding all of those various spots that need to be blocked in that red, and then we'll come back and we'll have a look at it. Okay, here we are. All that red blocked in. So we kind of carefully got it around those books there on the front, as well as the book on the pauldron. And these designs right here. So next we're going to move into shading that. And we're going to go back to a shade that we had used earlier, which is a mix of that Asmodeus red or corn red if you're using Citadel, and any form of straight black. So I mixed those together roughly 1-to-1, got them thinned down heavily on the palette. I'm going to draw some up here. And now for these areas, these like areas around the book, I'm basically just gonna like wash it over the whole of the red because they're so thin in there that it's really going to be almost impossible to get like an actual recess shade, and then we'll brighten it back up with some highlights afterwards. So I'm just going to go in, find all those areas, and just gently run that along each of the red areas there so that it can get some shading. And it's okay if it spills over onto the black book a bit, because we're gonna go back in and we're gonna get that all filled out and colored in a later video. But just try to keep it from spilling onto the armor as we're doing it. All right. So I'm gonna go around and repeat that with all of the various books. For the designs on the pauldron, these ones I'm going to try to be a little bit more accurate and apply it as a recess shade into the corners. So I'm just going to run down and along like that. Down there. And in some areas it's all so close together that it may end up just being an all over wash, but in some of these areas that are kind of a little bit wider here, where we can really get it into the recessed area, I'm going to try to just focus it into there. Same thing on this one. I'm just going to come in and I'm going to run this into those recessed areas as best as I can. So I'm going to keep going on with this, working that all the way around, and then we'll come back and we'll get started with the highlights. Okay, so we're back and we've got that wash put onto all that red. It's darkened it down a nice little bit there for the book covers. On these ones, I applied it more as just a recessed shade. There. So now we're going to move on to highlighting. And we're going to do our first layer of highlighting here with some Evil Sunz Scarlet. So I've thinned that down on the palette. I'm sticking with that same size 00 brush. I'm going to draw up a little bit. And for our book covers here, really we're just looking to run a line in along the edge. So if I was looking at my one up top here, I'm just going to take this and I'm going to run a nice line just down the edge of the cover there. Nice and thin. Doesn't need to be anything crazy. Not really room to do like a chunky and then a normal highlight on there. So I'm going to come in, we'll get a nice line on there. Come down that upward facing edge. Then you can switch it when we do the tops. Same thing, just brace yourself so you're comfortable. Find that upper edge. And just run a nice highlight along the top. So I'd kind of continue moving my way all around the books and getting that highlight in along those upper edges. Now, for the areas where it's kind of set flat back in there like that, what I'm going to do is an edge highlight around the outer edges here of the red. So on this part here, I would just turn myself so I'm comfortable, get braced, and then we're going to run a line straight across this upper portion. And then we would turn and we would do the same thing running down either edge here. So I'm going to go around, I'm going to get all those highlights in those different areas, and then we will come back and have a look at it before we move on to the next stage of highlighting. Okay, we're back. We've got that finished highlight on there. And on this portion of the pauldron here, I just did my best as I could to run it along the interior there. So we're going to do one more layer of highlight on this, and for that, we're going to use a little bit of Wild Rider Red. And this one is going to be just a really fine highlight. And we're going to do it slightly different depending on where we're applying it to. So, I think we'll do one of these books here. It's a little easier to see. I'm going to do it on one of the books, right, where the area is a little bit smaller. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to apply this just in the middle of the area where I highlighted previously. And now I'm probably not going to be able to actually get it like truly thin enough so that the other highlight still shows through in that area, but just the idea is to pick the spot that is in the middle there and give it just a little bit extra, like that, to draw a little bit of extra attention to that area. Or if there's like a raised up section of the book that we can get to, we'll go in and we'll apply it. So if we turn it up towards the top here, I'm going to try to apply it towards this upper section. Just to give it a little bit more a highlight, make it stand out just that little bit more than it did previously. All right. On these sections where it's inset, and we did more of a thicker highlight along it, my goal here is I'm going to apply this, or do my best to apply this inside the previous chunky highlight that I had put in there. So just nice and thin line, run it in there like that. Just to give it a little bit extra. So turn the model as you need to make sure that you're comfortable, and just run it in. Sticking with that same small size 00 brush. So I'm going to continue around with all of that, and then we'll come back and we'll have a look at the finished product. Okay, so here we are. Here's our finished product, getting all that red on there. You can see the orange highlights kind of help it stand out nicely there. I'm on the pauldrons. Got it worked onto that book there. And then into those designs over there. So that will take us to the end of today's video. I want to thank you all for watching. I hope you found some of this useful. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to the channel for more. Next time, we're going to work on getting all of this, the rest of these metallics, the gold and the other silvers, as well as all the parchment and purity seals done. And then we should really have at least this portion of the model pretty much finished up. So yeah, stay tuned for that. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you have fun painting.